Don't yawn. Seriously, try not to. You're sitting quietly when someone across the room suddenly opens their mouth and yawns. You notice it for barely a second. Then something strangely familiar begins happening inside you. Your jaw feels ready. Your mouth wants to open, even though you weren't tired a moment ago. You fight it. Maybe you press your lips together and pretend absolutely nothing is happening. Then the person beside you yawns too, making your little battle considerably more difficult. And there it is. One enormous yawn escapes before you can stop it. Congratulations, you may have just caught something that isn't actually a disease. Yawning is one of those ordinary human behaviors we almost never think about. We do it when we're sleepy, bored, exhausted, or sometimes for no obvious reason. But the simple act of yawning hides two surprisingly difficult questions. Why do humans yawn in the first place? And why can watching somebody else yawn make you want to join them? The second question becomes even stranger when you realize sight isn't always required. Hearing a yawn can sometimes be enough to trigger that familiar urge. Even thinking about yawning may make the idea suddenly difficult to ignore, which creates a slightly awkward problem. For this particular video, we are going to spend the next few minutes talking about yawning. A lot. So consider yourself warned. First, let's look at what your body actually does during a yawn. It begins with your mouth opening wide and your jaw stretching downward. You take a deep inhalation while muscles across your face and throat stretch. Your eyes may narrow, water slightly, or close for a moment. Then you breathe out, relax, and return to whatever you were doing. The entire performance usually lasts only several seconds. Yet those few seconds involve coordinated movements across your face, jaw, throat, and breathing system. And your timing can be spectacularly inconvenient. Imagine you're sitting in an important morning meeting with several people watching the presentation. You slept reasonably well, but suddenly a powerful yawn begins climbing toward the surface. You close your mouth. You straighten your posture and attempt to look intensely interested in the presentation. Unfortunately, your face has other plans. Your mouth opens anyway, forcing you to cover it, while pretending everything is perfectly normal. Then your coworker notices. A few moments later, she starts yawning too. Now another coworker sees her, and suddenly the meeting has developed its own chain reaction. Nobody planned this. Nobody needed instructions, yet one ordinary behavior appears to move quietly from person to person. Before explaining that strange effect, we need to clear away one famous misconception. You may have heard that people yawn because their bodies need more oxygen. It sounds reasonable because yawning includes a large, satisfying breath. More air should mean more oxygen, so the explanation seems almost obvious. For a long time, versions of this idea remained popular. Unfortunately, biology rarely cares whether an explanation sounds beautifully simple. Researchers have tested whether changing oxygen or carbon dioxide levels significantly changes how often people yawn. The results didn't support the simple idea that yawning mainly exists to refill your oxygen supply. So taking a few heroic, deep breaths probably won't defeat your next yawn. You can try. Your brain may remain unimpressed. If oxygen isn't the simple answer, why does your body keep doing this? That's where the story becomes much more interesting. Scientists have proposed several explanations, and no single theory completely solves the mystery. One important clue comes from examining exactly when yawning tends to happen. You often yawn when you're becoming sleepy or preparing to go to bed. But yawning also appears after waking, when your body is moving toward greater alertness. It can happen during boredom, long periods of inactivity, or changing levels of attention. That suggests yawning may somehow accompany transitions between different states of alertness. Think about your first few minutes after waking on a quiet morning. You stretch your arms, move your shoulders, open your mouth, and release a huge yawn. Hours later, you might do almost the same thing, while struggling through a boring afternoon meeting. The situations look different, but both involve changes in attention or arousal. This has encouraged researchers to investigate yawning as part of broader state-changing processes. In other words, a yawn may be connected with your brain shifting gears. But connected doesn't necessarily mean we already understand exactly what the yawn accomplishes. Another intriguing explanation involves something you probably never associate with yawning: temperature. Your brain produces heat as it works and operates within a carefully regulated temperature range. Some researchers have proposed that yawning may contribute to mechanisms regulating brain temperature. Opening your jaw changes blood flow around your face and head. The deep inhalation also moves air through your mouth and nasal passages. Together, these changes have inspired the idea that yawning could support brain cooling. Imagine your brain as an extremely sophisticated computer that dislikes getting unnecessarily warm. Your yawn would then be less like requesting oxygen and more like adjusting the cooling system. It's an appealing picture. But don't install a tiny fan in your head just yet. The brain cooling hypothesis has supporting evidence, but it isn't a universally settled explanation. Yawning may involve several biological functions rather than one beautifully simple purpose. And that uncertainty is actually what makes this ordinary behavior so scientifically interesting. You perform it automatically, yet researchers are still debating why evolution kept it around. The mystery becomes even bigger when we stop looking only at humans. Because humans are definitely not the only animals that yawn. Watch a sleepy dog long enough, and eventually its jaws may open into an impressive yawn. Cats do it too usually, while looking far more comfortable than you currently feel. Primates yawn. Many other vertebrate species also display behaviors recognizable as yawning. Suddenly, your boring morning yawn begins looking like part of something much older. Yawning appears across species separated by enormous stretches of evolutionary history. That doesn't mean every animal yawns for exactly the same biological reason. But its broad presence suggests this behavior isn't simply a strange modern human habit. Now imagine you're sitting on your sofa while your dog rests beside you. You stretch open your mouth and produce a long, sleepy yawn. Your dog looks directly at you for several seconds. Then its mouth opens. It yawns too.
Long, theatrical yawn. What was that?
And now we arrive at the really strange part. Scientists call this phenomenon contagious yawning, although nothing infectious is actually passing between you. There are no yawning viruses floating across the sofa. Instead, seeing another person yawn can sometimes trigger the same behavior in you. And surprisingly, you don't always need to see the entire person. Simply watching a face begin to yawn may already create that familiar sensation. Hearing someone yawn can also make certain people feel the urge themselves. Even reading descriptions of yawning may be enough to get your attention. Which means this video has now become a slightly unfair experiment. Maybe you're completely unaffected. Or maybe you've already yawned twice and are becoming suspicious of me.
Okay, fine, you win.
Either way, contagious yawning doesn't affect everyone equally every single time. Some people respond quickly, while others can watch repeated yawns without joining them. Your attention also matters, because you generally need to notice the behavior first. But why should another person's open mouth influence what your own body does? Scientists have explored several possible explanations for this surprisingly social behavior. One idea involves our natural tendency to synchronize certain behaviors with people around us. Humans constantly adjust to one another without consciously deciding to do it. We match walking rhythms, copy gestures, and sometimes unconsciously mirror another person's posture. A contagious yawn may belong to this broader family of socially influenced behaviors. Imagine 3 friends relaxing together after a long evening. One person yawns while checking her phone. Another notices and yawns several seconds later. The third person watches both of them and suddenly feels her own jaw preparing. Within moments, the entire group looks ready for bed. Nobody ordered this synchronization, and nobody consciously decided to copy anyone. Their nervous systems simply responded to social information unfolding around them. Another popular explanation connects contagious yawning with empathy and social connection. You've probably heard claims that empathetic people are more likely to catch another person's yawn. That explanation is memorable, emotionally satisfying, and extremely easy to repeat online. The evidence, however, is more complicated than that simple story suggests. Some studies have reported relationships between contagious yawning and aspects of social familiarity. Other research has failed to support a straightforward link between yawning and empathy. So failing to catch somebody yawn doesn't mean you're secretly a terrible person. Your friendships are safe. And yawning immediately after your friend doesn't automatically make you an empathy champion either. Age, attention, individual differences, and experimental conditions may all influence contagious yawning. Scientists are still working out how these different factors interact with one another. There's another useful clue hidden in the people who trigger your yawns. In some research, familiarity between individuals appears to influence contagious yawning responses. That raises interesting questions about how yawning interacts with social relationships and group behavior. But once again, the safest conclusion is that there probably isn't one simple explanation. Contagious yawning may involve several overlapping mechanisms rather than one dedicated social switch. And humans aren't the only species researchers have investigated for this effect. Contagious yawning has been studied in several social animals, especially certain primates and dogs. Dogs are particularly interesting because they spend so much time watching and interacting with humans. Some experiments have examined whether dogs respond differently to human yawns and other mouth movements. Results across studies haven't always been identical, so the details remain actively debated. Still, the possibility creates one wonderfully ridiculous situation in your living room. You yawn. Your dog notices. A few seconds later, your dog stretches its neck and produces an enormous yawn. You stare at your dog, wondering whether you somehow started the whole thing. Then you see your dog yawning and immediately feel another one approaching. Now you yawn again at this point. Nobody knows who started it. Of course, dogs can't explain whether your yawn actually caused theirs. Researchers therefore use controlled experiments to separate contagious responses from ordinary spontaneous yawning. They may compare real yawns with other facial movements under carefully controlled conditions. Even then, animal behavior rarely gives scientists perfectly clean and simple answers. But the possibility of yawning across species reveals how interesting this tiny behavior can become. Something lasting only seconds may connect sleep, attention, physiology, evolution, and social behavior. And we still haven't tested the most important subject in this entire video. You. So let's conduct a completely unofficial experiment right now. Imagine someone sitting directly across from you and beginning a long, slow yawn. Their jaw drops, their eyes narrow, and they take one deep breath. Now imagine another person beside them doing exactly the same thing. Then picture a sleepy dog stretching before opening its mouth into an enormous yawn. Don't do it. Keep your mouth closed and continue listening as though nothing unusual is happening. Maybe you're feeling absolutely nothing and wondering why anyone finds yawning contagious. Or perhaps your jaw suddenly feels suspiciously ready to stretch. You might even be pressing your lips together right now. If you've already yawned, don't worry, because the experiment was hardly laboratory quality. We have no control group, no censors, and absolutely no respectable scientific paperwork. We do, however, have an impressive number of yawns. And that demonstrates something genuinely fascinating about this otherwise ordinary human behavior. Your brain constantly responds to what other people around you are doing. Sometimes those responses happen before you're consciously aware of making any decision. A smile can influence your mood, and another person's posture may subtly change yours. Yawning appears to belong somewhere within this complicated landscape of automatic social responses. Yet its deeper biological purpose remains surprisingly difficult to pin down. We know yawning often appears around changes in sleepiness, alertness, and behavioral state. We know many animals yawn, suggesting the behavior has deep evolutionary roots. We also know that yawning can become contagious in humans and some other species. What we don't have is one explanation that neatly connects every piece of evidence. Maybe yawning contributes to regulating physiological state in several different ways. Maybe its social effects developed alongside older biological functions already present in our ancestors. Or perhaps several mechanisms overlap whenever that familiar urge suddenly appears. For now, the humble yawn continues keeping some of its secrets. Tonight you settle onto the sofa after a long day and finally begin relaxing. Your dog curls up beside you, looking considerably more prepared for sleep than you are. Your eyelids grow heavy, and one final yawn slowly escapes before you can stop it. Your dog raises its head, looks directly at you, and yawns. A moment later, you look at the dog. The dog looks back. Neither of you seems particularly interested in taking responsibility. A yawn lasts only seconds, yet its full purpose remains surprisingly mysterious. And after spending 10 minutes hearing about yawning, only one question really matters. Did you yawn?